Good morning. We are back. Slightly broken up week this week. I think I've had other bits on, so I haven't made a video. I think the progress has been a little bit broken up as well, but I did have a quick look back, and we have done a fair bunch of stuff. I can't remember which of these were in for the last game. I think a lot of these done bits were done. Let me just run the game and show you what it's looking like at the minute. So I think vision and rooms and everything were all in last time. I've added stairs, so we now have upstairs and downstairs. I think the minimap might be new as well. As you move around, you'll see that that's filling in. I've added some buttons as well, so if I click see all, I just set visibility on everything. If I hide all, it all vanishes again, so we can kind of check and debug of different visibility cases, right? If I click see all on this and we go up these stairs and we come back down the stairs, you can see that vision is remembered as it's supposed to be. So this is not done in a particularly sophisticated way. This is just, I'll go show you quickly. I think it's in game. Our grid tile thing on our game state. What would that be? There, this grid tile is just bigger now. So what would that actually be set up in here? There we go. So I've added a grid depth. We've got more stuff, and the helpers account for that. So the stride is per floor, and then there's a stride per row. All works kind of exactly like you would guess. Again, there will be a tag to commit in the description, so if you do want to go and have a poke at the details, you can. So that's the first thing I added. That was not super difficult. I guess there's a little bit of a tweak to our, in fact, on this bit, to our initialization. One of the things I'm trying, or I want to do with this game is I want upstairs and downstairs to actually relate to each other logically. So I think probably what we end up with is the levels being significantly bigger than this. I think what we end up with is levels that are significantly bigger than this. And I want you to be able to reason about them because a lot of roguelikes, I don't know, the ups and downs kind of scattered just semi-randomly. Whereas here, if you look, so there's two upstairs here. If I come down, you see that there's also a downstairs here. Like they do exactly what you would expect them to do. And I think if we make the levels bigger and add interest, I don't know, with like disconnected sections of levels and ways to tunnel through walls, stuff like that, I think being able to think it through like that would be useful. Potentially even at stuff like you can add a thing that'll let you like make a hole in the floor that you can fall through or something. Might be interesting, but that's all a long way off. It does mean our init grid tiles now. What does it do? It tracks the positions of the downstairs on the previous floor, and we have this sentinel value, so we can detect if they're not set. And then somewhere in here, it'll use that. What we're doing in here, this is making our rooms. We connect rooms with corridors. And there we go. Then we place downstairs. I think just into 3 rooms at random. Where's the upstairs? My dope. There we go. Stair pos in previous stair pos, in previous floor down stair pos list. Make sure that they're lined up with each other. But yeah, that bit wasn't too hard. The other thing I've been working on is an enemy system. So if I click spawn, we spawn a rat. If I spawn a bunch of them, I can spawn a bunch. They all act independently. So I had a bug at one point where mousing over one, they'd all trigger, but they're all individually interactive. And if I click them, I kill them. They get deleted out of the enemy manager. And I can then spawn in a fresh batch. Which is neat. The the code for that's probably slightly more interesting. I can't remember if it's all in enemy or if I think I've left it in game and it probably needs moving. Yeah, it's all in game at the minute. So what we have is a buffer for the actual enemy data. So enemies have some very simple data. I think it's literally like position, floor, and type. That will probably get more complicated as time goes on. And then I've tried doing, I guess people call it generational indices. Oh, yeah. So, I've seen Soding has a video implementing an entity system recently where he talks about this. There's an old Rust conference video about ECS that I think everybody knows about via Jonathan Blow reaction to it that talks about this. But essentially, enemies aren't just indexed by an ID. They're indexed by an ID that is an indexed into an array and a generation number. And so if you avoid issues like double deletes causing accidental damage. Right, you can imagine saying like I want to delete enemy 3 and then another chunk of logic says I want to delete enemy 3. If the list rearranged, you'd end up deleting enemy 4 on accident. If the list doesn't rearrange but you had a new write come in, because what we're aiming for is doing this without any allocations. We're imagining there's going to be a lot of enemies eventually. This probably runs every frame on quite a lot of data. We don't want this to be allocating lots of memory, even just occasionally, because it'll feel bad. So what we've got is we define essentially slots to put enemies in, and then we track which slots are currently active. So if we delete something, we literally just set that to inactive, and what generation those slots are. So if I scroll down a bit, so add enemy probably gives you a better idea. We keep track of our insert index. I've got this function up here that says go and find me what the next valid insert index is. Maybe that doesn't need to be pulled out. We'll have to see if that's actually useful anywhere else. Maybe that does just need to be part of this. I don't know. I've got it set to be sort of dumb. So like I say, the maximum capacity is set so that if we ever were to run out of space, this would just fail. And I've got it failing as aggressively as possible so we know if it ever happens, because I think we write the game sensibly, we should be able to never hit this. And so hitting this is a sign, like I say in here, either we're not tidying things up like we expect, or we're spawning things endlessly, or there's a bug in our reasoning about like where to put things, so we're filling up when we shouldn't be, or something like that. I found this to be a good rule of thumb, so I think my drawables buffer plays by the same rule, and it's caught bugs where things weren't getting cleared as I expected. But yeah, no. So once we've done it, we then just set the active index to be true. We set its current generation, and the generation is, I guess, generated by this helper up here. So what we're saying is we start searching where you tell us to start searching, and it moves forward until it finds an empty slot, right? So if enemy manager.active indices at that slot, it means it's already being used, so we increase the index. And if that would overflow our buffer, we reset back to 0 and the generation increases. So the second time we try to write into slot 1, we're going to be generation 2, and then the third time it'd be generation 3, and so on. So we never accidentally end up referring to something we don't mean to refer to, whilst also staying within this kind of like pool of memory. So I think that's all quite neat. Whether this will work well enough for the game, I don't know. I think I ummed and ahed about this for a while. I considered just having it be a dynamic array for a little while, because Odin has very nice syntax for that. I think what it'd be like enemies is just dynamic. Like this would work. But it means every time that we do like an append and enemies, that there's the chance it'll allocate memory, and I think actually by default this will not reserve any memory, so I think this would actually almost always end up allocating memory for the first bunch of stuff it does. which we could do stuff about, but I didn't want to spend time thinking about that if we know that's not a good way to do it in the long run. So we're going with this. Yeah, you see here that when we get an enemy, it's required to match both the index and be active before we go and get the enemy out. So yeah, like I say, the tags commit will be below. So if any of this is actually interesting to you, you can have a poke around. Maybe this is interesting as well. I could probably actually use some advice for this. So this is how I'm looping over all of the enemies. So where do we need this? Currently just in drawing. So if you imagine we would like to draw these enemies on the screen. So what we need to do is we need to loop through all the enemies that exist and see which ones are currently on screen. My first thought was it'd be nice to have an enemy manager get all or get on floor. Probably does work, but I think it means either passing around, like returning out a statically sized array that's the same size as the maximum number of enemies we could have, which could end up being quite big. Or having a backing buffer again with a slice that looks into it, which I think we might end up doing if this turns out to be too finicky. What I've currently got, I guess, it's an iterator. I don't know if Odin has a nicer like syntax for writing an iterator like this. Maybe that's even worth looking up. But what I have is an iterator that says here, I'm going to go get next. I'm going to start at 0. It tells me if it found an enemy, and it gives me the enemy's index. While this is true, so if it found no enemies, it'll skip this over. But if it finds an enemy, we go get the enemy. We do all of our reasoning. There's a bit of copy paste in here. Some of this can probably be tidied up. Because I think draw enemies, draw player, and draw tile all use these same chunks. So this can all probably get tidied in the near future. We get all the way down to the bottom. We set our action, and we then reset found an enemy index. Using the iterator again. So, yeah. Like I said, I don't know if there's a neater syntax to do that. I'll scribble that in my README because I think that's a good thought. Odin iterator syntax. As far as I know, there isn't anything, but that's how I'm doing it, and that way you avoid the need for any, like allocation or any sort of backing buffer. Oh yeah, we'll see. Maybe that's a bad way of doing it, but that's the way I'm doing it at the minute. Let me just check, because I did make some notes before we started. Again, AI generated. One thing that actually is quite nice about having the tags is I can be like, hey, go write me up a chronological summary of what changed from dev 10 to 11. So yeah, the minimap is new. Split the thing into multiple floors, add some buttons, stairs, fixed vision / visibility checks. So yeah, I cocked up the vision checks across multiple floors. We won't dwell on that too long. Oh yeah, groups player data into a cohesive structure. Maybe that's worth a quick look. And then yeah, it's all just enemies. If we go back to game.odin, we find our game struct. I think this is new. These fields used to just live on the game, and I think it was just starting to get to the point where they were obviously going to start causing confusion. So like a game floor, I think wasn't as clear as it needed to be, because really what we're saying is what floor is the player on. Obviously, as we start having logic about the visibility of different enemies, we now have enemy floors involved as well. So enemy has a floor on it. If we go jump to it as well. Right. So it felt like it made sense for these two to be living on these structs. Just looking at it now, I do wonder, because I think Odin does have some nice stuff for shared things like that. So we could have something like a grid entity. Be a struct with pos, grid pos, and floor by 32. And I think enemy could do using grid entity. No. Like that. Like that. There you go. And I think then player can do the same. That again. I need to tidy where things live a little bit because so you could be using grid entities, grid entity. That should compile exactly the same and all work. So using is just a way to say I want to pull that thing into my namespace. That might be useful to us because, in fact, when I've got those things I'm saying I want to put that help us, this might be step one. I think you can then define a proc that would take in a grid entity, grid. You just return. My God, I can't type. And then a different proc that takes in a player. Jesus Christ. You can tell it's early, my hands aren't working. You return foo player. Right. And we can have another one for enemy. It would take enemy. Do. Right, so that's not trivial that would work. That's quite neat. And the reason being, you tell, I guess the compiler that within this struct, basically it has this struct. So I guess Ginger Bills and some cleverness to say, if you've defined this with using, it gets tagged up in some way that the type checking can know it is a grid entity, and it knows the offset into player to find the grid entity, so that you can use them in this way, which is very neat. And obviously, where it becomes then particularly useful, I could imagine adding like items, right? They're almost certainly going to be the same like this. So we'll see. I did and R as well. Enemy manager. We'll have to see if it ends up becoming a more general, just entity manager. Currently, the only things I can think of that will be like that will be enemies and, or I guess maybe it's safer to say like NPCs, characters that aren't the player, and items. But whether it makes sense to have the two intertwined. So I think if we're going to be iterating, for example, when we're drawing all of the enemies, we're going to be iterating over all of the enemies. When we're trying to trigger game logic, I think we're often going to want to look at just the enemies and not look at the items. So I think having separated like creature manager and item manager probably makes sense for us. But if I write it as I have it currently, it's going to be a bunch of repeated annoyance, which isn't the end of the world when there's two of them. So maybe that's just what we do. But we'll see. I'm going to undo that grid entity thing for now. We'll see if that actually does come up. Oh, I don't want to delete the tag. How do I just unstage? There you go. Yeah, so that's where things are currently up to. If I go look at the README, do I have any notes about what I want to do next? Enemy manager, I think, is kind of done. I want to add player health. I want to add, I guess, our first chunk of UI. So as the game gets more sophisticated, I'm imagining to try to keep the scope under control rather than having the interest come from the variety of enemies. I'm hoping that what we have is a bunch of relatively simple enemies, but some sort of mechanism where they do a visibility check, they're intelligent, they see another friendly, they communicate with each other, and they respond in a way that makes sort of interesting sense. So we'll see how that plays out. But step one toward that would be to add an unintelligent enemy that just sees you and attacks you, right? I think we could have something like unintelligent and then another state that's like rabid, where once they see you, they just forever are hunting you down. Where maybe unintelligent like loses interest and wanders off. I think we could come up with something where the behaviors are very simple, but distinct. And then we can add in our first little bit of combat. And that's, at that point, I think you could really call it a game because you could lose without a win condition and then it's officially a game. So that'd be nice. Yeah. I think that also means we're going to have to work out sequencing events in the dungeon. So that actually might be the next thing to think about, is how we deal with kind of like time ticking and different things acting at different speeds, different actions taking different amounts of time, and all that sort of thing. But problem for the next session. Yeah, that's what I had to say. I hope you enjoyed. If there's any comments or questions, happy to see them down below. Not, I will catch you on the next one.